Good afternoon. Welcome to this meeting of MUFON, Minnesota. And it's my pleasure. I'm Bill McNeff. I'm one of the Assistant State Directors for MUFON in Minnesota. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guest, Ken W. Is it Storch or Storch?
Storch, Stark.
Storch.
Just
Okay.
don't call me late for dinner.
Okay, a good German name, I think. I don't know. But anyway, he's going to talk to us about proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's also, another title is A Cop's Case for an Arrest Warrant on Flying Saucers. He is a decorated law enforcement officer. He's been investigating UFO cases for 35 years, utilizing his unique criminal investigative techniques. His law enforcement approach to this issue is dynamic and aggressive. Ken has been featured on the History Channel's UFO Files and UFO Hunters. And I heard him speak at the MUFON Symposium, a recent MUFON Symposium, and I really appreciate his expertise and the information that he is about to give us. So with no further ado, Ken Storch.
Let me explain a little bit about myself so you folks will understand how I see the world. And I think that's important because facts are facts, but it's how you interpret those facts that you arrive at a conclusion. And how you interpret those facts is based upon your background, how you were raised, and so how you see the world. And when I tell you I believe this to be fact, it's based upon how I see the world. And I tell you that, I tell you where you can go to substantiate what I've told you, and therefore you can see that it's facts. I come to a point in my talk where I say it's my opinion, or it's supposition on my part. That's all it is. I make a couple of disclaimers. I don't want to change anybody's belief system. I think it's important that you hold on to your own values. I don't want to influence anybody's opinion one way or the other. I simply want to be able to present my case as I see it. I come from a very, very, very conservative background. My father absolutely no way in hell believed in flying saucers. And I wasn't involved in flying saucers when I was a little kid running around with my dad. I didn't get involved in it until after I was in the Air Force, and that's a whole nother issue. But my conservative upbringing had me as a hardcore skeptic. And I describe myself even today as an objective skeptic. I refrain from using the term UFO. I don't really care about UFOs, unidentified flying objects. It means nothing to me. What I am concerned about is IFOs, identified flying objects. Somebody comes to me and says, hey, I saw this light and it was doing weird stuff in the sky and it was over here 1 minute and over there. Okay, whatever. But if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I saw a structured craft and this UFO was standing no more than 100 yards from me, it had a shiny metallic skin to it, the top was rotating clockwise, the underneath was rotating counterclockwise, and it had windows on it. Well, that's not a UFO. You've identified it. It's an IFO. You saw a structured craft. And those cases are the ones that I'm interested in. Now, I become interested in UFOs if it's associated with an IFO report. I'll give you two classic examples of those. Phoenix Lights. All right? Thousands of people saw UFO that night. Hundreds of people saw a structured craft. So then you have to take into account reports of unidentified flying objects when it's associated with an IFO. Another classic case is the Stephenville, Texas case. Are you all familiar with that case? Okay. hundreds of people saw UFOs buzzing around and jets flying here and jets flying there and lights doing strange things, but there were a number of people that actually saw a structured craft. And that's in association with you. Then you have, as an investigator, as a cop, you have to look at the reports of UFOs and associate it with an IFO. So I'm into IFO. The other reason why I do not like the term UFO, that's a government made up term. Uncle Sam gave us that term, unidentified flying object. Do you know why he did that? My opinion, I don't know if it's fact or not, but my opinion. It sanitizes it. Because a UFO can be anything. It can be military hardware, it could be a balloon, it could be a meteor, it could be ball lightning, it could be anything. For somebody to stand in front of you and say, well, it was a flying saucer, that's not a UFO. So the term UFO sanitizes flying saucers, and I use the term flying saucers. And I don't get the giggle factor when I use it, although a lot of people, wow, flying saucers, come on, man. UFOs, yeah, okay, it could be anything, but flying saucers, let's get real. And I get this all the time. I was in a discussion, and I don't know if you would call it that, argument, that's what it was. Astrophysicists out of University of Colorado, Dr. McTosh out of the University of Arizona. It was actually one of the shows I was doing with the History Channel, UFO Files. And he made a statement, Dr. McTosh said, there is no scientific evidence to prove that aliens or alien technology is among us. Now this was all caught on camera. It never aired, which kind of ticked me off, but I looked at the two astrophysicists and I said, really? And he said, yeah. He said, there is no scientific evidence. He said, that's where your argument doesn't hold water. I went, really? Okay, Doc. Is a stethoscope a scientific instrument? Well, yeah, it is. You can listen to the heartbeat. You can measure the beat of the heart. You can time it to find out what the pulse is. Yeah, a stethoscope's a scientific instrument. What about a microscope? Is that a scientific instrument? Sure it is. What about an X-ray? Is that a scientific instrument? And of course, Dr. McTosh says, well, yes. What's your point? Is radar a scientific instrument? Well, of course it is. It measures speed, measures altitude, also measures density. And he knew then that he had stepped in it, because I said, when you have cases where you have radar telemetry, confirmation, and I said, by the way, Doc, this is coming from the government, not civilian. When the military radar operator tells the interceptor pilot to look in a certain portion or a certain quadrant of the sky, and the pilot confirms he's seen an object there, and his onboard radar is registering and the landlocked radar is registering, that's scientific evidence. Well, that doesn't necessarily prove that it's alien technology. Well, what does it prove? And as a scientist, wouldn't that stimulate your curiosity? And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is, here we'll put science over here. And we'll put me, the cop, over here. For 31 years, I operated under the proof beyond reasonable, as you can see, I abbreviate, doubt. Okay? And the scientific academia over here says, well, our standard is much higher. And of course, I come back with the usual, yeah, but we put people to death over here. We hang them, or execute them. What do they do in Minnesota? Anything? Nothing. No death penalty? That's too bad. Okay, so science over here says we have a higher standard, and even though you put people to death and execute them, you've executed innocent people. Yeah, true. There have been cases when we've hung the wrong person. That doesn't diminish the fact that an occurrence happened over here. Are there any cops in here? Oh, right on. How long?
30 years.
Oh man, I'm sorry. Cops start down here with reasonable suspicion. Okay, actually it goes below that. Because I can be driving down the street in my squad car and I see Lorna here standing on the street corner in her short mini skirt, you know, in minus 12-degree weather, halter top, going, yoo-hoo. It doesn't stop me from pulling up next to her and saying, Lorna, are you cold today? I can stop and talk to her just like any other citizen could stop and talk to her. So that's below reasonable suspicion. Reasonable suspicion is when I look at the temperature gauge and it's minus 12 and she's standing out there in a mini skirt and a halter top. Now, wouldn't anybody with common ordinary sense go, why? Not in Minnesota. Man, that's a tough, you guys are a tough crowd. It's reasonable suspicion. Something's not right. I can't quite put my finger on it being a trained observer, but something's not right, so I have reasonable suspicion, okay? Over here on the scientific side, they have a big question mark, a question, curiosity. Why do atoms all fit together and stay in there without flying off and, you know, whatever kind of research that they're looking at? But it starts with a curiosity and a question. Well, it starts over here too with curiosity. I mean, cops are curious creatures. I mean, we want to know the truth and we want to know why people do things that they do and who did it. You know, I think there's 6 major who, what, where, when, why, and how in a criminal investigation. And if you apply those to any type of investigation, you'll usually come to a reasonable conclusion. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Got reasonable suspicion. Well, after talking to Lorna, she says she's not from Minnesota. She's originally from Florida, and her luggage was stolen, and she's trying to get back to Florida. Okay, that could be a reasonable explanation. But why are you standing out on a street corner? And then I come to find out that, well, yeah, she actually does live here, and she gives me a name and a date of birth, and I find out that she's been arrested 4 times for prostitution. Lorna. Darn it! Well, that elevates up to probable cause. Probable cause, okay? Now, it gives me a little bit more leverage in dealing with the crime that I'm investigating. At least I think I'm investigating a crime. It's still not proof beyond a reasonable doubt because what she said may very well be true. Maybe her luggage was stolen. Just because she's from Florida now doesn't mean that she's not going back to Florida, and just because she has a past arrest record doesn't necessarily mean that she's engaged in criminal activity now. But being the trained observer that I am, I'm thinking in the back of my mind, this ain't working. So we're up to probable cause. Over here on the scientific side, they start their little inquiry investigation and they get further into their research. Law enforcement says, hey, okay, if I'm going to make an arrest, I have to have probable cause for my arrest. I have to be able to tell the district attorney why I think this person is involved in criminal activity at this point in time and why this person I think should be arrested and prosecuted. And I've got to lay it out for the district attorney, and they will say yay or nay on my case. Either you have enough probable cause to make an arrest or you don't. And the district attorney will say, I think we have enough to go to court and get a conviction, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, as you go up the scale on the scientific side, according to academia, their scale is much higher up here. Do you know why that is, or reason why they say that is? Anybody? Is because they're able to, this is how it was explained to me, because I asked the question, because academia is able to recreate the occurrence so they can study it, and they can take it apart. And my retort to that was, well, what if you're dealing with intelligence? and they don't recreate it at the time and place or in the area that you think they're going to recreate it. How do you duplicate that if you're dealing with intelligence? I mean, if you're dealing with why people are getting sick, for instance, in a certain town, and you can't see it that it's the food supply or the water supply, then you think, well, maybe it's the air supply. But you're able to go to that environment and study it as it's occurring, as it's unraveling, whereas science academia doesn't necessarily have to do or can't do that with flying saucers, because they appear in Minnesota today. Tomorrow they may be down in Oklahoma or over in Australia. And we're left with a lot of questions and a lot of unanswered points that science says, well, since we can't duplicate it, since we can't really put it into a laboratory, we're not able to examine it, and therefore it doesn't exist. Or what is happening, we can apply a mundane explanation to. By the way, I'm not an expert on anything. I want to make that perfectly clear, okay? I'm not an expert on criminal investigation. I love to hunt and fish, and I'm not an expert on hunting and fishing. I'm not an expert on flying saucers or cattle mutilations. I kind of take the approach that, that Mark Twain once said. There is no such thing as an expert, just different levels of ignorance. And if you stop and think about it, that's true. Just somebody has a little bit more knowledge about a particular subject than somebody else doesn't necessarily mean they have all the answers. And we fall into that trap when somebody goes, oh, here's an expert on terrorism. Well, we assume, because the title of expert's been applied to that, that their explanation and their reasoning is accurate, and therefore what they say is correct. And we all know that science has been wrong many, many, many times. And they're going to be wrong many, many more times in the future, especially when ET comes out and really embarrasses them. But let's say that we go with the science that their standard is higher. Okay. Let's just take it from the starts down here. Reasonable suspicion in their question, and we take it up to reasonable doubt, proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I say I have proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Science says no. Don't you think that this portion of it here should start up here then? If I'm able to say, look, here's a case. This is what I have. This is coming from the government. This isn't coming from Minnesota MUFON and field investigators. This is coming from the government's own files. And we're able to show proof beyond a reasonable doubt that not only something happened extraordinary, but we believe that a common, ordinary person with common sense, although I understand that common sense is not very common, but they would look at it and go, man, that looks like a flying saucer to me. Okay, then why doesn't academia start here then and go up to their level of inquiry? And I think the reason why is because if they started here on a case with proof beyond a reasonable doubt, then they would be forced to look at the facts. And it's much easier for academia scientists to apply a mundane reasoning or explanation to an event that is extraordinary. This one particular astrophysicist, who I won't mention, but Jeff, we were in a heated discussion, said, well, it's all a matter of perception, isn't it, Ken? It's just a matter of how you see it. You see it as alien technology, and I see it as strictly as a strange light in the sky, and it doesn't prove anything. We have to be careful of that, and I think that academia does exactly that. They don't want to talk about flying saucers. They don't want to investigate flying saucers. And so they put the blinders on and they throw out mundane explanations for an incident that occurred, and that's very unfortunate. Not all academia does that, though. I mean, you're familiar with Hynek. Roger McDonald was another astrophysicist that was on the verge of blowing the lid off the topic of flying saucers. Buzz Aldrin, Edgar Mitchell. I had an opportunity to sit in a room with 5 other interviewers with Edgar Mitchell. Do you know who he is? Okay, cool. He's an astronaut, went to the moon. And I asked him straight up, looked the man right in the eye and asked him, are flying saucers real? And he said unequivocally yes. And he said NASA knows about it. You know, so I think that there are people in the science academia. Unfortunately, mainstream is not going to, and there's all kinds of theories as to why they won't. But I think that given the political environment, the negative feedback that you get when you talk about flying saucers, the point that I'm trying to make is that academia would like to keep it mundane. It's important for them to. Whether it has to do with federal funding, whether it has to do with their own personal belief, whether it has to do with religious connotations, it's much easier. Once again, I'm back to why the term UFO, and I don't use it very often, is because it sanitizes, it gives academia an out. Well, UFO can mean absolutely anything. And that's not true. That's the reason why I'm interested in IFOs, flying saucers. And I make no qualms about it. It took me a little bit to come out of the closet because I knew it was going to have ramifications, at least in my professional life. I had some friends, at least I thought they were, and they quit talking to me after I did that. It's like I had the plague. But until today, I've been out of law enforcement going on 3 years now, and I still get emails from some of my colleagues back in Colorado and from around the planet. Do you still go after those wacky cases? And of course, the answer is yes. And I'm working on an ongoing case right now. When do we break? Go? Keep going? Right arm. Before I get into some of the evidence that I'm about to show you in this particular case, let me explain what happened with UFO hunters. I don't know at this stage if it was just coincidental or if it was a planned thing. Whatever, I think we have a couple of the segments in there that I filmed with UFO hunters. We were doing a segment on Dugway, Utah, the new Area 51, and we did actually 2 segments. One was the Men in Black, and the other one, the new Area 51. Let me back up. 1996, 97, Buckley Air Force Base is located in the city of Aurora. If you look it up or Google it, you'll see at that particular time, I think it was Buckley Air National Guard, and then around 2000, they made it an Air Force base. But a lot of heavy-duty DARPA defense is located there. The NSA it's not headquartered, but their operational facility with all the satellite dishes and everything else is located at Buckley. It's a very, very secretive base, high security. Even when it was a National Guard, the Air Force was in there using it, but they kept the National Guard facade up for whatever reasons. I had a major that was active duty on the base. He flew the F-16s. I always try to convince him to take me in a ride. Never happened. But he likes to drink scotch, and so do I. And so we would get together. His house happened to be in the area that I happened to patrol, and I would see him occasionally out in the yard, picking dandelions or whatever it is you do in the front yard. And we got to talking, and I asked him probably 100 times about flying saucers and stuff, and he told me some interesting things, but he told me, he said, Ken, he says, you ought to take a look at Dugway, Utah. I didn't even know about it at this particular time. I didn't even know Dugway existed. And I looked at him and I go, he said, more importantly, he said, why don't you go to Michaels Air Force Base? Well, I went to the base registry, typed in Michaels Air Force Base, and nothing came up. So I thought this major was, sending me on a wild goose chase. And so the next time I saw him out in his front yard picking dandelions, I pulled up in the squad car and I said, hey, what kind of BS are you feeding me? I said, there is no Michael Air Force Base. And he goes, yeah, there is. He said, you typed in Michael's Air Force Base. He said, type in Michael Army Air Corps Base and see what you get. And I did. And sure as enough, popped up. It's out of Dugway. It was an old training base in World War II for, I think, bomber pilots. I'm not sure about that. I think that's what it said at the time. Anyway, long story short, my partner Bob and I, we jumped in my camper and we drove 14 hours out to Dugway. First day, very first day, we pulled up into the desert on Dugway, and out of nowhere comes a helicopter gunship. Came right over the top of the camper, so low that the prop wash was rocking the camper back and forth. He circled around in front of us and sat down probably 100 yards in front of us on this dirt 2-lane road. And it was the real deal. He had a chain gun mounted underneath of it. It was pointed right at us. And his visor was down and the chopper was just sitting on the ground with the blades rotating. And Bob, my partner, had a 35 millimeter camera mounted on a gun stock with a 500 millimeter lens. I said, Bob, get a picture of this bastard. He looked over at me, he goes, he'll blow us out of the goddamn canyon. He'll think it's a weapon. And of course I'm thinking I wanted pictures of it, and we took a number of pictures, but they weren't with that 500 millimeter lens on the bottom, on his gun stock. That was our first visit to Dugway. We found Michaels Air Force Base, and I'm leading up to UFO hunters here, so give me a minute here, long way around. Out in the middle of the Utah desert, and I mean absolutely, look, I've never been to the moon, but this has to be a pretty damn close replica of what the moon looks like. There isn't a blade of grass, there isn't a tree, there as far as you can see. And as you start, as you come off of, I think it's highway, 2-lane blacktop highway, 17 or something like that, there's a big sign that says Pony Express Trail, and it points out to the desert, and underneath of it says, make sure you have water and gas for the next 250 miles. And they're not exaggerating. Once you leave that little town, Vernal, I think it's called, and head out across the desert, there's 200 plus miles before you're going to find any more provisions as far as gasoline and potable water. There's water out there, but you wouldn't want to drink it. And so it's out in the middle of nowhere. What's that? Oh, yeah, that's okay. It's out in the middle of, like I said, nowhere. Here is as far as I know, and this is coming from the United States Air Force Base Information Personnel, largest runway in the world. Michael, it's called or registered under Michael Army Air Corps, and it was back in the early 40s an Army air base. And they say that this runway is the largest in the world, and it's operational. While we were there, several F-16s, Tomcats came in, did touch and goes. There were a number of other aircraft that came. We were told by the base information officer that it was a substitute runway for the shuttle. On one of the UFO hunters, by the way, that's the reason why they got a hold of us, is because we were one of the first, I want to say we were the first, that actually went out there and tried to prove or disprove that Dugway is the new Area 51. My partner Bob thinks it is. I'm not 100% convinced of that, but he makes a strong argument. One evening we were out there, we were watching, we quit counting after 90 headlights out in the middle of the desert. They were coming across, it was a military convoy, we could see that, deuce and a half, all you military guys and gals, deuce and a half, there you go. Heavy trucks coming across the desert about 2 o'clock in the morning, and we counted them, and we just quit counting at 90, and they were disappearing, they were going underground. We were able to locate a concrete contractor out of Salt Lake City that his company delivered over 5,000 trucks of concrete to Dugway, and it wasn't for the runway. We felt that there was an underground base being built at that time, and that's what we were witnessing, was the movement of equipment and other stuff from Area 51 to Dugway. Yes, sir?
I think in the 50s, it had acquired the name Dugway, and it was the Development and Experimentation Center for the Army Chemical Corps.
You're absolutely correct. In fact, I was leading up to it, you jumped the gun on me, but you're right, that's exactly what it is. Dugway was the testing ground for nerve gas and mustard gas. Excuse me. And when you go out there, they have all these breathers out in the middle of nowhere. And they tell you, if you hear the siren going off, it's too late, you're probably dead. Okay, but it makes you feel better seeing all these air sniffers out in the middle of nowhere. And then directly east of Dugway, you see all the revetments where they house the nerve gas, and they're in the process now of destroying it, supposedly, because they got the furnace going and stuff, and on UFO Hunters they did some filming on it. But yeah, you're right, it was the chemical testing grounds for the United States Army. One day we were going out there we had received a report, an anonymous tip. Somebody called in to my pager. This is before we had cell phones, but I had pagers, and left a message on my pager that there was going to be a test of a disc out in Dugway, and that they were going to fly it from Area 51 down to Dugway. And they were going to come across the desert through the back roads and everything like that, blah, blah, blah. And so, once again, we jumped in my Jeep station wagon, drove nonstop to get out there to see if we could be on site when this thing happened. We stopped in at Willow Springs. That's where Tom lived. He ran a little bar there. It's the only alcohol bar within a 100-mile radius, I think. At least that's what we were told. And as far as I know, the only place that you get really cold beer. No scotch. He didn't carry scotch. But we stopped in there, and it was in the evening, drove all day to get there, and it was about 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. It was like May, this time of year, April and May. And Tom was there, and he looked at us, and he said, "You boys going out into the desert tonight?" And we said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Why don't you guys stay here tonight?" He said, "You can stay here at the bar." He says, "I got a couple of beds and stuff." And I looked at Tom, and I go, "Why?" And he goes, "Guys," and by the way, we had established a good rapport with Tom by this time. He said, "There's been some really strange things going on." He said, "I've seen the green flashes out in the desert." And apparently there was these bright green fluorescent beams that people were seeing flashing out in the desert, and they'd be followed up with some kind of hissing noise and stuff like that. Still, I'm not sure what that is. I have a few suspicions, but I'm not really sure. And then he said, he goes, "The locals won't go out into the desert out there at night because they're getting confronted by people from the base." And Bob said, "You mean military?" And Tom shook his head and he goes, "Ken, I don't really know." But he said, "I'd feel better if you guys stay here." I said, "Well, we got something else we got to do, and we got to be out in the desert." So we went out there. 2 o'clock in the morning, Bob's in the front of the Jeep, I'm in the back. Seat folded down, I'm laying back there. We got our cameras all set up and fighting hard to stay awake. About 2 o'clock in the morning, a car comes, blacked out, comes up into this little, it's called Willow Springs, and it's where they would change Pony Express riders. It was a way station where they would change off horses, and it's just a little spot in the road, and there's a spring. You can't drink the water out of it. I'm not sure exactly why, but it's not potable. but there's a bubbling spring there. And we were camped damn near right next to it when this car pulled in behind us. And they're all blacked out, but they lit up our car with a spotlight, and the car door opens, and I could hear their feet walking on the gravel. And by this time, I'm grabbing my pistol, Bob is grabbing his, and I'm thinking, oh, this is not looking good. The guy stops at the back of my Jeep, the windows down. I can hear him say something to the other driver of the vehicle, yeah, this is the car. They get back in their vehicle and disappear, drive off into the desert. We get out of our car, and Bob looks at me and he goes, what the hell was that all about? I have no clue. Next morning about 9:30, nothing happened, by the way, we never saw the disc. About 9:30, we're leaving, and as we're driving down this county road, it's dusty, I look in the rearview mirror and I can see this dust cloud coming like a bat out of hell, and this guy comes right up on our ass. And probably no more than 5 or 6 feet from back of the bumper, and we're doing 45, 50 miles an hour going down this county dirt road. And this went on for about 4 miles, and finally Bob said, I've had enough of it, pull over. Pulled over, the car pulls over behind us. The guy gets out and he's dressed in black. Now he doesn't have the black suit and the fedora hat. He has a one-piece black jumpsuit, a black windbreaker. He has a shoulder rig, looked like the butt of a .45 tucked up underneath his left armpit. Black boots, the pants are bloused at the boots. The passenger in the car never got out. All I can tell you is he was wearing a black baseball cap, and it looked like a black windbreaker too, but I couldn't tell you what the rest of them. The driver gets out, Bob gets out, I'm driving, I stay behind the wheel of the car, and I adjust the side view mirror so I can see him, and I adjust the rear view mirror so I can see the passenger, and I have already drawn my pistol. There's no insignia on this car. It's just a white car. Or excuse me, it was a white pickup truck with a white camper shell on the back of it. And Bob and the driver meet at the rear of my Jeep, at the very rear of the Jeep, and right away they start jaw-jacking, is what layman term is. Now, what do you think you're doing, is what Bob said, and this guy goes, I will ask the questions, you will answer. Well, he doesn't know Bob very well. Was a civilian contractor with the DEA for 30 years. That's how we met. And I call him the Mad Italian, because he flames really easy. And when that guy said that, I could see Bob, his face and back of his head's turning red. And I thought, uh-oh, this is going to go south really quick. And this guy says, I want to see some ID. And in those uncertain terms, Bob said, well, bend over and I'll give you all the ID you need. And Bob said, before I answer any of your damn questions and we go any further, how about you showing me some ID? He goes, who the hell are you? Now, this guy points to the front license plate of this tag, and it's a GS-14. Are you familiar with government tags? Okay, that's going to be in that segment with the with UFO hunters. And he points to it. What's that? Cool. He points to the tag, and he said, that's all the ID that you need. I wrote the tag number down. I still have it, okay? When I was active law enforcement at the time, so when I got back to the city of Aurora and I got on my computer in the squad car, the first thing I did, I typed in that tag number. And it came back to a Bureau of Land Management vehicle, Park County, Colorado. That's 640 miles from Tuolumne County in Dugway. So being the curious cop that I am, I called the the Bureau of Land Management supervisor in Park County and got him on the telephone. And I said, hey, this is Officer Ken Storch with the Aurora Police Department. I said, we had a complaint on one of your drivers and your vehicle. And he says, really? He says, do you happen to have the tag number? And I go, I just happen to have it in front of me. And I said, do you know where this vehicle is? And I gave him the tag number, and he goes, absolutely, officer. It's sitting out in the parking lot. I'm looking at it right now. Now, there's two possible explanations that I could come up with. One, the vehicle tag was stolen. By the way, the vehicle that the tag was on with Park County, Colorado was a white Jeep. The vehicle that we encountered out there in Tuolumne County, Dugway, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Tuolumne, it just doesn't roll off my tongue very well. The mad Italian can say it real easy, but I can't. Was a white Ford pickup truck with a white camper on the back of it. So it was two different vehicles. The only two explanations I could come up with is that either the guys in black had stolen the tag and were using it, or that it was a black ops operation and they interchanged the plates all the time. I don't know that for a fact. That's just supposition on my part. But it didn't make any sense that they could get back that plate to that vehicle by the time I got back to the city of Aurora. Why would they do it? He didn't know that I'd copied the plate down. Plus, I don't think he knew that I was a cop. I told UFO hunters, I think they cut that segment out because the producer said, well, how serious did it get? And I said, well, let me put it to you this way. I knew that the one guy was armed, so I have to assume, I know you're not supposed to do that because it makes an ass out of you and me, but I also have to assume that the guy in the car is armed. They didn't show any ID. There was no uniform other than this black dress, and we're 75 miles from the nearest town, out in the middle of the desert, out in the middle of nowhere. So I drew my gun. I knew that Bob had a gun, so I figured it was a Mexican standoff. And it was. It was tense there for about 3 or 4 minutes. I thought the guy was going to put his hands on Bob because he started to make a move towards Bob, and he did two tours in Vietnam, and he's a Marine, and he takes a defensive posture real quick. And I saw him take a defensive posture with this. I thought, uh-oh, because he's going to put his hands on Bob. Bob's going to put his ass on the ground. I'm figuring the other guy's going to bail out of the car with a gun, and it will be decision time. Fortunately, it didn't go that route. The guy backed off, the driver did. We got back in our car. They tailed us for about 45 minutes until we hit the blacktop, and then we went south and they went north. To this day, I do not know who they were. Now, UFO hunters said, whoa, it's the men in black. Well, the guy was dressed in black. He had a black baseball cap, black windbreaker, black jumpsuit with blouse pants and black boots. When I hear men in black, I think of the fedora hat and the Blues Brother type coats and hats and stuff like that, but maybe they moved into the 21st century, I don't know. We found out later, and we didn't know this, that other residents, locals in the area that have cattle that graze out there, if they can find grass, had encounters with the guys in black. The other thing I'm going to show you is an ongoing case that I'm working on as we speak. In fact, Bob is on scene now collecting some more information. Excuse me, last year, out of nowhere, UFO hunter calls me up and says, we're going to do a show on cattle mutilations. And Bob and I have been doing cattle mutilations for probably 20 years. At that particular point in time, I wasn't convinced that there was an ET connection into cattle mutilations. Bob was totally convinced. But I wasn't. I talked to some gentlemen here before we got started, and I was leaning towards a private entity like private business or something was doing it for various reasons, and I won't get into it. But UFO hunters called us up and they said, hey, we've got a report of a cattle mutilation in Missouri, and that's how it's pronounced, by the way, Missouri, not Missouri. Damn Yankees. It's not too far from where you're at. I live right now in northeastern Oklahoma, right on the Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma border in the foothills of the Ozarks on a beautiful lake. I love it. But they said it's only about 150, 160 miles from where you're at. Can you go check it out and see if it's a legitimate cattle mutilation? And if it is, we'd like to do a show on that particular case. They weren't going to have us in the show. And I said, yeah. They said, hey, we'll pay for your expenses out there. If it's not a legitimate case, would you please let us know so we don't spend our time? It was cheaper for them to send us out there and check it out. So Bob and I threw a bunch of clothes. This was February 4th, 2009. Threw a bunch of clothes in my pickup truck. We jumped in, had to make arrangements for my dogs to be fed and a couple other things, and down the road we went. We drove to the farm where the mutilation took place September of 2008. So it was a pretty old case. But they wanted us to interview the farmer and see if it was legit. So we pull up into the yard. And by the way, we had to get directions from a number of area ranchers to find the farm because it's out in the middle of nowhere, and we got lost a half a dozen times. And I've been accused of I staged it, that Bob did the mutilation, that there was all kinds of accusations on the internet as to how this all unfolded. What I'm telling you right now is exactly how it unfolded. UFO hunters got a hold of us, sent us out there to see if it was legitimate. If it was, fine. If it wasn't, forget about it. That was it. They weren't even going to pay for a hotel room. They said, hey, it's only 160 miles. You drive out there in the morning, you can be home that evening. That's how California bigwigs figured it. We drive out there, we find the farm. I pull up into the yard, I get out of the truck, and the wife comes to the door, and she says, can I help you? And I said, I'm looking for Galen Jones, that's his name. And she said, well, he's out in the pasture cutting with a chainsaw a tree that blew down. Now, this is February 5th when we got out there. And the weather was turning nasty. It was starting to sleet. There was about a 30, 35 mile an hour wind blowing out of the northwest. Temperature was about 40 degrees, 38, somewhere in that neighborhood. It wasn't not a pleasant day. And I said to her, I said, ma'am, is it okay if I open the gate and drive my truck back to the pasture? And she said, yeah. She said, is it four-wheel drive? She said, it's pretty soggy. She goes, unless it's not four-wheel drive, I wouldn't recommend it. And I go, yeah, it's four-wheel drive. Bob is sitting in the truck, and he goes, oh, hell with it. He said, let's just walk. He said, I'd just soon walk. He said, I've been sitting in this damn truck for years. He said, I want to get out and stretch my legs. So we decided to walk. We opened the gate. We're walking out across the pasture, and Bob looks at me, and he goes, did she say he was cutting wood with a chainsaw? And I go, yeah. He goes, well, I don't hear a chainsaw. And I look out across the pasture, and up over the rise comes this little tractor with this farmer on it. He's got a trailer behind him. As he gets closer, I can see it's a chainsaw in the back and some down limbs. But the expression on his face, I could tell that something was wrong. I could see that the man was very, very upset. And he pulls up, and I told Bob, I said, hey, we're about to get our butts chewed on. This farmer probably didn't appreciate us coming across his land. And Bob says, I don't think so. Pulls up, I said, are you Galen Jones? And he says, yeah. I said, Kevin Barry from UFO Hunters, did he call you and talk to you? And he goes, yeah. I said, well, we're out here to take a look at your cow that was mutilated last September. He looks me straight in the eye and he goes, screw that. He said, they hit me last night. And I looked at him, I go, what? He said, they got one of my cows last night. He said, I got a fresh mute down on the pasture right now. We drive out there. The best that we can figure is the cow was down about 2.5 hours that morning. Now, he checked his herd at 8 o'clock that night. He spotlighted his herd. He went out there. We come to find out, long story, I'm jumping around here a little bit, but he's had 21 cows mutilated on his farm since 1990. The man is out of business now. He sold off his herd. He doesn't want any more to do with it. But he had checked his herd February 4th at about 8 o'clock that night, was out in the pasture because he's been having problems with his herd, and he did a head count, and he had about 50 head of cows. He saw this heifer. She was pregnant with a cow, with a calf. And he knew that come April or May, she was going to calve. She was going to have a calf. And so he was particularly interested in this one to the point where he inoculated her. so that the calf and cow would be healthy. And he was devastated. That morning when he went out to saw that tree at 7 o'clock in the morning, he finds his heifer on the pasture mutilated. I've got pictures of it. It just so happened that when we were throwing clothes and rain gear and everything else into the truck, I threw my metal detector. I take it with me whenever I go out on these cases. And you might want to keep this, for you investigators that go out, bring a metal detector. I'm going to tell you why. We get out to the site of the cow. I pull out my metal detector. It's a white. I don't know if you're familiar with metal detectors. It's a brand. It's a high dollar one. It's got a computer. You can program it for whatever it is you're looking for, whether it's silver coins, copper, gold. You can program it into the detector and it will eliminate all the trash. And there's a series of steps that you've got to go through in order to calibrate it. I calibrated it for silver, platinum, and gold. Precious metals is what I did, is what I programmed it for. And I happened to have silver with me, and I threw it down on the ground and calibrated the metal detector. It's working fine. And while I'm doing that, Bob is taking crime scene photographs of the cow, and the mad Italian's talking to himself. As he's walking around the carcass, he's taking pictures and he's going, God damn, this is fresh. God, man, this is unbelievable. It's the first time that I know of where investigators have been on a cattle mute within hours. I'm willing to bet that the damn thing was going on when we were driving down that morning, and I'll tell you why. I've got some additional evidence to show just that. I wish I'd have known it at the time. We didn't find out about it until about 2 months later. But I bring the metal detector over and I'm wandering around the carcass. I'm scanning the ground. I'm not getting anything. I come over the stomach and chest portion of the calf. Nothing. I move down to the neck. Nothing. I come across the ear. I get a hit. The farmer is down on his knees with Bob because she was eating. There was grass and hay in her mouth when she died. That's an important fact. And damn UFO hunters wouldn't put that in the show. It really pissed me off. Because from a crime scene investigation, the cow was eating, which substantiates his story that he was out feeding the herd and checking the herd and doing a head count that evening at 8 o'clock. He told us, he said, that tractor, I took a roll of those big rolls of hay and he spread it out in the pasture and his cows were eating and he came back and did a head count. It validated his side of what happened. She was eating when she was dead. I get a hit. Bob and the rancher got the mouth open on the carcass, and Bob, the mad Italian's taking pictures of her throat because her tongue's missing. Now explain to me how the hay, and I mean she had a mouthful of hay. I think we've got one picture in there where it shows it, and the tongue is cut. I mean it's just like you took a razor and sliced it off all the way back down deep in the throat. When I get that hit, and Bob looked up at me and he said, "Did you get something?" I didn't want to say in front of the rancher right then and there, but he heard the sound too. He saw it, and I'm looking down at the screen on my metal detector, and it's flashing platinum. Is what it's telling me that I got a hit on. I come back down over the ear, I get nothing. I go to the jaw line, I get a hit. It's moving down along the jaw line and it's going down into the throat. Whatever it is that I'm picking up on the metal detector is moving. I'm scanning this. The Galen, the farmer, he's backing away from the carcass like it's contaminated, and Bob is getting his knife out, and he says, "Ken," he goes, "Locate it," and he said, "I'll cut it out." Well, exactly what I was trying to do. As I'm moving, it was moving down into the chest portion of the animal. I took the metal detector and I was wanding it back and forth on the chest, and I wasn't getting anything. I moved it back up, and whatever it was moving back up into the sinus cavity of the animal, back up into the ear. Real quick, we've got the ear. We cut the ear off. I'll come back to that. I get it trapped in the ear. I've got it. I'm getting a hit on the ear, and it's not moving. It's staying stationary right inside the ear. And I tell Bob, I said, "Hey," I said, "get on the phone, call Kevin, tell him what we got." Keep in mind, by this time it's starting to snow, and it's getting nasty out. Well, I wanted to cut the head off right there at the neck. The farmer said he had that chainsaw. I said, let's chainsaw it. We'll cut the neck off, and we'll take the whole head, ear, and everything with us. This is where I screwed up. I made a mistake. I should have went ahead and did it. My gut instincts told me to do it. All my cop training, all my street senses, everything told me, Ken, do it, and do it now. But I got the producers of UFO Hunters on the phone, and they go, don't go any further. We got a camera crew coming out. They'll be out there in 12 hours. Well, and you have to understand something. They were paying the freight. They were paying my expenses and Bob's expenses to go out there, and they're the ones that came up with Galen Jones. I, to this day, don't know how they came up with that particular case. I'm arguing with them on the phone. All I can tell you is the reason why we didn't is because the weather was so damn nasty. By the time we got out of that pasture, I had to have Galen pull me out. I had a four-wheel drive GMC 3/4 ton truck, and he eventually had to go get his tractor and help us get out of the pasture because that's how nasty it was getting. I was slinging mud everywhere with those tires, and got stuck in a little rise coming out of the pasture. They, being UFO hunters, said, hey, go buy whatever you need. We're going to have a camera crew. We want the camera crew out there when you cut the head off. They want to film it. They want to document all of it. Well, we had to drive 40 miles to find the nearest Walmart to go purchase a 50-gallon plastic trash barrel with a lid. By that time, it's dark, and it's really snowing now, and they even got tornado warnings out for that area of Missouri. We ended up staying in a hotel room, and we're in the hotel room, and Bob and I are talking, what is it that we just encountered? Because I'm still trying to digest what exactly happened. And he looks at me and he says, do you think your metal detector was malfunctioning? I go, hell no. I said, the thing's never, I said, it's all printed circuits. I said, you saw me with that piece of silver. I calibrated it. I said, it's never failed. We go out the next morning, long story short, two of the camera people show up, others are on their way. We go out there, I wand the cow and nothing. I was really pissed. I was not at UFO Hunters, I was upset with me. I knew last evening when we encountered it that we should have done it right then. I think Bob, my partner, hit on how they do it, and that is ROV, remote operated vehicle. I think that these cattle animals are targeted months, maybe years, maybe even when they're still in the womb as a calf. That implant is put into the animal so that when they, whoever they is, decide that they're going to go after that animal, that ROV, this is supposition on our part now, but based upon what we've uncovered, and I can't tell you everything right now because it's still an ongoing investigation, and I don't want to contaminate any other cases that might pop up as a result of it. But I think that that ROV has a template of that cow. It's standing out there in the pasture. As it gets close, it's that tag moves down to the base of the animal's spine, sends out a signal, and it paralyzes it right there standing up. The animal's alive, but it can't move. I know this to be a fact because you can do that with an animal. You can paralyze, you can do it with a human being. Spinal cord right there. You take a severe hit right there and it will paralyze you. You'll feel a numbness in your fingers. You won't be able to move your muscles, but you'll be conscious. And I think that that implant goes to the base of the spine, freezes the animal right there, The ROV comes up to the side of it, attaches itself to the cow. Right there, it starts carving out the laser, starts carving out the meats. They puncture the side of the animal, removing the blood while this is going on and all organs inside. When the ROV detaches itself, the animal falls over. Now, I know a lot of people said, well, there's been cases where it's shown that the animal's been dropped. Yep. I know of a case in Colorado where they found a 1,200-pound horse 10 feet up in the fork of a tree that had been mutilated. Okay? I'm not saying that the ROV doesn't have the capability of moving the animal if it has to. I think that it can move it, but it would primarily do it while the animal's standing right there, and when it's done, it just falls over and it's dead. This cow, you could see where her footprints were where she was eating. She literally fell over on her left side when she died. So that's the theory.
Is what an ROV is?
Remote operated vehicle. Okay. You see demonstrations, the Air Force is using them to hunt Taliban over in Afghanistan, but I think ROVs have been around a long time. I think the orbs that people are seeing, the orbs of light, the reports that you get, I think those are examples of ROVs or probes. I think those are examples. Interesting enough, the night before, Galen Jones's son saw, he didn't know we were there. He called his mom and dad up and said, hey, there's a light bouncing around out there on the pasture, up in the air. I'm gonna show you a case of a cattle mutilation we did in Saguache Valley, Colorado. And it's really important from a number of standpoint. This one that you're gonna see was hit by lightning. Actually, the steer was sitting in the pasture. This is Blue Mesa, Colorado, where this was taken. And lightning struck the ground. It was wet. I think it fried like 5 or 6 animals. Reason why I point this out, because veterinarians will quickly point out, well, you see this circular pattern here and this one over here, and that's what you're mistaken for cattle mutilations, because the hide is shrinking, and when it does, it pulls away, and that's where predators, coyotes, and possums and birds and everything have been feeding it, and as a result, when it deteriorates, the hide shrinks and comes back, and you get these circular patterns. And that is true. That's exactly what happened, and that's what's happening here. That is not a mutilated cow, or at least by the definition that we're looking for. Go to the next one. Aha! This is a mutilated animal. Now, let me explain something about this particular case. What these photographs, I think there's a few of them in succession here, are crime scene photographs. This is taken by the Saguache County Sheriff's Department. This animal, H01, the night before, or the day before, rancher had about 1,200 head, and he has them all numbered. He could pull up on his laptop, and he could tell you when this animal was inoculated, when it was born, the condition notes on the calf as far as health-wise. This was a very healthy animal 24 hours ago. The herd is about 2.5 miles from the farmhouse. Next morning when he wakes up, it's 75 feet from his front door. Okay? And people are saying, well, that shoots it out of your ROV. No, it doesn't. I'll tell you why. But what I want you to notice, 2 things, is first of all, this is a fresh kill. You can tell because there is still capillary blood in the tissue, as you can see here. Okay? A very pronounced circular cut taken off the side. That's the right side. The cow's laying on his left side. Can you go to the next one? I think we have here we go, close up. Veterinarian came out and was examining this animal and walked up, took a look at it and goes, oh, predators. Now, the rancher got really upset because this old boy has been raising cattle in the Saguache County for about 60 years, and he's seen enough dead cows in his life and realized what predation is. And he looks at the veterinarian and he's looking at us, shaking his head. That's not predation. I asked the veterinarian, I said, well, what did the animal die of? And this doctor looks me in the eye and says, well, rapid loss of blood. And I go, where is it? And he goes, where's what? I said, where's the blood? Okay? This animal weighed about 800 pounds, so you can imagine how much blood it was inside the cavity. There is none anywhere around this animal. And here's the interesting thing is that it's a dirt road. He's about 5 to 10 feet off this dirt lane that goes up to the ranch house. And we walked from the front porch all the way down to where it goes to the county road, and there's no tracks on this animal going up that road. At some point in time, he had to cross the road to get there. And there are no hoofs, prints of this animal. Go to the next one. I think there's, yeah. The inside, the tongue's gone, just like the cow in Galen's ranch in Missouri. The tongue was cut way down in here, which was another question. Now, I know coyotes, possums, raccoons, birds will always eat the soft tissue first. You know why? Correct. That's exactly right. They are not going to go down through the mouth of an animal to get the tongue all the way down in the larynx. They're going to eat out the anus, they're going to eat out the stomach, they will eat out the eye first. But this particular animal, as you can see, is pulling the back, there's no tongue. It's cut way down in the throat, just like Galen's cow, way down, and it is a clean cut. It's not torn. See, one more. Yeah, here's another view of it. Shows you that it was taken out. That's the sheriff's hands, by the way. By the way, this cow, that's a felony crime if you're familiar with it. This animal was about $1,000. In Colorado, anything over $500, whether it's damaged or stolen, it becomes a felony. This animal here cost the rancher about $1,000. I think there's one more in there. Yeah, here you go. Here's a close-up view of and you can see how fresh this kill is. I mean, you know, Bob and I wanted to take the animal and, you know, at least take the loins and stuff like that and barbecue it because we figured the meat was still good. And but you can see that some of these cuts, if you look closely, like right up here, there is not one itty bitty tooth mark, tear, or anything. Now, yes, sir.
Were you like an ME or a biologist looking at it?
No. We asked several, and the University of Colorado in Greeley, Northern Colorado, University of Northern Colorado, Greeley, they have an excellent veterinarian department. They hung up on me. They wouldn't touch it with a, and it wasn't because they were insulted or anything. They just didn't want to get involved anywhere near, shape, or form as a result of, I even tried to have some blood work up done on the animal to see what kind of toxicology test, and they wouldn't do it. Wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole, which really kind of made me angry. But I think there's a picture of the anus also. If you, no, there we go. What's interesting about this particular picture is this is the ass end of the cow. The entire intestinal tract is gone, but you can see all the cow manure. So there was manure inside the intestines when it was removed. The stomach was gone, heart and lung was gone, and we think all of it was taken through the anus is how it was done. So we figured we were probably 24 to 48 hours behind when we got word that this had happened. By the time we got down to Swatch County and we were able to take a look at it, so in relative speaking, it was a fairly fresh mute, but not like Galen's.
Blood is gone too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's no. I think there's an overview of the entire. Is there? Yeah. Here. Oh, well, hold on a second. This animal was from a ranch that was 25 miles further south than the fresh kill. You can tell this is an old mute. You can tell that it's not as fresh. Rigor mortis is set in. Once again, no remnants of blood, no remnants of predation. Has anybody done any cattle mutable investigations in here by any chance, or animal mutes or anything like that? How about hunters? We got hunters in here? No? Right. Okay. Cool. Well, you know, when coyotes, bears, do you have bears up here? Okay. You all got wolverines too, don't you? Yeah, they're carrion eaters. What's that? Oh yeah. Anytime predation takes place on a carcass, they scatter hide, bones. I mean, we walk up on a carcass. That first picture I showed you of the cow that got struck by lightning, you can see where they've torn the bones and stuff out of it and the hide and drug it off in the distance land. None of that. You don't see any of that happening. Now, the business about flies and insects not touching about it, I don't know about that. Damn flies will eat anything. But once again, no indication of where the blood went from. This thing right here is really interesting. We found that on a number of mutes, and I think I've got a picture of it in the one with Galen Jones, that burnt spot there. Bob thinks that's where the ROV has attached itself to the animal, and we've seen that on a number of mutilation cases. So, is there one more, I think? Yeah, here's a close-up of that old mute. Once again, you can see this pattern, and my theory is that when the ROV attaches itself to the side of the animal, keep in mind, we're talking an ROV probably the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. While it's cutting, this is my theory, I think, and once again, I think a probe goes into the side of the animal, into the aorta, and the heart pumps the blood right out. I talked to a veterinarian, he won't let me use his name, but he did a number of for lack of a better word, experiments in which the heart pumped the blood out in just a matter of seconds. I think that's it. Can we go to? Do you want to take a break right quick? Oh, okay, yeah. Then we'll get into the other stuff. Yes, sir.
Maybe you mentioned it and I missed it, but what's your conviction that what intelligence is running these ROVs? Is it Earth-based or is it extraterrestrial, or is that on total?
No, I up until probably 2009, I told you at the beginning, I'm an objective skeptic. That's just the nature of the beast and who and what I am. I'm convinced now that we're dealing with a technology far above anything that we're dealing with in terms of man-made. I think it's ET, to answer your question. It may have some cooperation from humans.
Shared intelligence or something?
Of some sort. Everybody says the military and the government. I wouldn't be so quick to hang the government to dry out on this. It could be big business, as far as we know. That's. I don't know why I put those damn things in there. They crack me up. We're going to take a break, and then when we get done with break, we'll go into the case that's ongoing. I can give you some information on it and share some things with you and share some evidence with you.
10, 15 minutes, back to 22.
Thank you all for being here. If you're not a member of MUFON yet, please join. The membership forms are in the back. It's $45 a year. Unless you're a student, $20 a year for 18 and under, $35 a year for if you're 65 or over. Ken?
And I'm a lifetime member of MUFON, and just to dovetail what Lauren said, it's a good organization. They're trying to answer questions and get to the truth, and I think that's what it's all about. Now we're going to go to the actual case that I was talking about with Galen Jones in Missouri, and show you some of the crime scene photos that we took of the carcass. That's me, in case you don't know. There's the white metal detector. Bob snapped this picture right before I picked up the hit on the animal's ear. As you can tell, it's cold, and that's the tractor I was talking about, where we first met him coming across the pasture. Now, what's interesting about where this animal is, you can't see the farmhouse. Therefore, you can't see the animal from the farmhouse. It's up over this hill right here. You can see this is the hay, for lack of a better term, I'm sure ranchers have another name for it maybe, but this is the hay trail that Galen had spread out to feed this herd. I just started, I had already gone around the carcass with the metal detector, and I was just starting to, I started off on the carcass and the stomach area and everything like that, and was working my way up to the head when I got the hit on the ear. Oh, this is me prior to Bob snapped this picture. I told you he's a mad Italian, but I'm calibrating it right here before I get to the carcass. I had just put a piece of silver on the ground. I calibrated it, and I wound it to make sure that it was reading it, and that the screen was telling me that I was picking up silver. So what I'm doing there, the carcass is back over here. I'm just calibrating it away from. And as you can see, it was a very wet, muddy, cloudy, nasty, typical Minnesota reserve day.
That was February 3rd.
This was February 5th.
Where was that?
The location is about an hour east of Springfield, Missouri. This is when we first arrived on scene, and Galen is telling us that he had checked this herd and this particular animal because she was heavy with calf. And we're basically going over how he found her and everything else. And as you can, oh, never mind, that's okay, go ahead. I was just going to point out, that's the gate that we went through. Go on to the next one. It's just,
How long had she been down?
we figured that she had been attacked somewhere, law enforcement jargon, time of death, TOD, time of death. We put somewhere between 4 and 4:30 in the morning. Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking over the crime scene. Neither one of us, Bob or me, have approached the carcass. We took a bunch of pictures in the surrounding area. I'm not going to go into that. It's just crime scene photograph. You do that in case something shows up later. You photograph the entire area, and we're still talking to Galen and still looking at the carcass, determining exactly what it is we got. Here's that burn spot. Remember the other carcass? It's been on all of them. I say burn spot. That's not an accurate description because I looked really closely. It didn't look like the hair had been burned, but it looked like, this is circumstance, my opinion, it's not fact, but it looked like something had attached itself like a tick, a big tick. You know, when you pull a tick off your skin, it leaves a welt and tears the skin away. That's what it reminded me of. Something had attached itself to the side of the animal there. My opinion. I don't know that for a fact. I'm actually chasing the object here. Right here is the neck, and I'm trying to cut it off to keep it from going, and it's heading back up. And Bob's snapping pictures like a fool. I shouldn't say that because he really did a good job. By the time this is after the fact, and you can see that rigor mortis is setting in. By the way, there's 2 stages of rigor mortis. I don't know if you all know that or not. The first stage, depending, a lot of things come into play. Room temperature, atmospheric conditions, humidity, all that comes into play as to how quick rigor mortis sets in. The temperature here right now, you can see by the way we're dressed, it's 38, 40 degrees. And there was a stiff wind blowing. Rigor mortis, your body's going to cool real quick, and rigor mortis is going to set in a matter of hours, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. And then it'll loosen up, and then the final stage of rigor mortis on a carcass or a body, 10 to 15 hours later, it really gets stiff. This is this is the picture and the case that we were sent down to look at. This happened in September of '08. And this is Galen's cow. And this was the case that we went down in February. He took photographs and of the animal and everything. And this is where the udder was. And as you can see, once again, we have these very defined precision cuts. And the udder was removed, the sexual organs were removed out of this cow, and the blood was missing. And well, you can see there's a little tiny drop of blood here, but that's it. And I mean, you remove a cow's udder, you're going to get a lot of blood, especially something like that. But that was the case that we went down on. Now, here's something that UFO hunters didn't go into, and I don't know why. But that udder that was there, they took it while we were there. They came back. The camera crew, the whole crew and everything. We went to breakfast. We've been filming all day for the show. We went to dinner and then breakfast next morning. And when we arrived on scene, Galen was extremely upset. I don't know if it was the local neighbors in the area, and you gotta understand, farming communities, it's like the jungle telegraph, stuff travels really fast. And he, at first, thought that somebody may have come from the camera crew, me or Bob or whatever, and removed the udder to make the story better. I can assure you that was not the case. But when we got back on scene with the camera crew, the udder was removed.
Somebody took it, right?
Someone or something, they came back. Here's what I think happened, is whatever transpired with this animal occurred sometime around 4 o'clock in the morning while Bob and I are driving there. Because we got there, I think at 7:30 quarter to 8 was when we pulled into the yard that morning. Whatever took place, they stopped in the middle of their operation. In fact, if it wouldn't have been such nasty weather, Bob, when he was kneeling down in front of the carcass, thought that he saw where there appeared to be incisions that were starting to be made, and they stopped. We don't know that. That was simply an observation on his part. He didn't get a chance to photograph him at the time, but he was noticing that. He made notes in his pad that evening. When he went to the hotel room, he had made some notations to check on that following morning on those incisions that he saw on the carcass. So here's what we think happened, is that whom or whatever was after this animal got interrupted. And it could have been something as simple as a car driving down the road. There is a county road not too far from where the carcass was, and it could have been somebody on their way to work or whatever at 4 o'clock in the morning. That wouldn't be unusual, and the car came by and they had to detach itself from the animal, and they weren't able to get back to it. Galen says he gets up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and there's activity going on in the farm, so they weren't able to get back to the carcass. But after the camera crew and everything arrived on scene, the bastards came back and they took the udder. Oh, this is the bone pile. Galen calls it the bone pile. Now, what's really interesting on the body language here is this man is out of the cattle business. He no longer, it has devastated. He's lost, I think, 21 or 22, I'm not really sure. And these are all the carcasses where he drug all the animals that had been mutilated and piled them up, and these are the remnants of the bone. I took a whole bunch of skulls and a couple of rib bones and everything, and I'm having one of the skulls is being looked at by a forensic pathologist. There were some things that we found out that it's best to keep it mouth shut right now. But looking at some things, but Galen's dejected. If you look at his body language, the man was just absolutely devastated, and he was pissed. angry. That cow was about $2,000. The calf inside of it, if it was able to go to maturity, he could have sold that fall at the farm sale, he said, for maybe $800 to $1,200, depending on what it dressed out as. But that was the second calf that she was a very healthy cow. Here's the eye is missing. Okay, now what's unusual in this particular case is she's laying on her right side. She should have been laying on her left side, but she's laying on her right side. If you look closely, you can see some of the hay that's in her mouth, in her cud, as they call it. And I think I got a picture in there with Bob and...
Why is that? What do you mean? Why is that?
What's that?
Why does it matter that she's on one side or?
Because all the other mutilations have been on the right side and have been laying on her left side. This is a case, once again, this is the case that we went down to check on to see if it was a legitimate mutilation case. And as you can see, the side of the cheek and taken out, the eye's missing and the tongue's missing in this one. Excuse me, it turned out to be a legitimate mute, at least we think it was. But that was the case in September that we were going down to take a look at. That's what took us down there. Okay, this is, we put this in here in the Swatch case in Colorado. You saw the pictures earlier. This is the close-up that I was looking for. If you look closely, you can see little globules of blood, but take a look at this cut along here. Now, for those of us that hunt and skin animals, try to duplicate that, okay? I don't know if you know this or not, but most people don't, that when you take a knife, I don't care if it's a scalpel, when you start cutting hair will dull a knife and a scissors real quick. And there are no hesitation. It's almost like it's one continuous cut. What's important about these little globules? Yeah, easy for you guys to say. I told you, twilliqui. I can't get that to roll off my tongue. Little drops of blood, thank you. It appeared, this is not my words, this comes from the vet. And him and I got into a pissing contest. He makes a statement, it looks like they've been cauterized. Okay? And of course, as soon as he said that, and my, cauterized, well, predators don't carry equipment to cauterize wounds. I don't know that that's the case, but that it was important. Here, this is a close-up. Here's a little bit of blood. The reason why that's there, you can see the hay right here. She had it in her mouth. She had it all over her chin. At least we can determine she was eating at the time of death. She continued to chew the hay when she fell over dead. There's a little bit of blood here and a little blood here. We think what happened was the cow, they were going to move it, they being whoever was doing this, they were going to move the animal, and it was a last second decision not to, and they disconnected from the animal and she fell over. And the reason why this blood's here is because they didn't have an opportunity to get all of it out of her. They were interrupted. They got the eye, they got the tongue, and we didn't know it at the time, but they got the uterus. We didn't know that at the time, but they did. But as you saw in that one photo, they came back when the entire crew was there and got the udder.
They only like one eye though.
Yeah, I have not looked at a case in which they haven't. There's the udder. You can see it in our original photograph. There's the udder right there. And they came back and took it.
Did you say that calf was taken or it was drained of blood, the calf inside?
No, the calf was not taken in this one. The calf was still inside. I personally think that that's what they were after. Here you go. This is when I'm getting a hit on the animal, and I step back. As soon as I got the hit on the animal, because it really caught me off guard. I was truly not expecting anything. And when I got the hit, and I stepped back, and I'm recalibrating to make sure I did it right. So I'm stepping back, and I'm coming back up to the carcass. Galen is opening the mouth here with this branch, and as he pries it open, hay is falling out of the mouth. So, I mean, that was a pretty, there's my truck. Oh, never mind, that was my, that's okay, you don't want to see my truck anyway. That was my Jimmy. Is my Jimmy. Yeah, then I'm deep into wanting the animal and trying to keep whatever it was we were dealing with from going deep into the cavity. I was afraid that once it got into the cavity, we would lose it. I don't know why I thought that. It was just something that went through my mind, and so I was able to keep it up here in the ear. Like I said, I regret to this day that we didn't cut the head off and take the whole damn thing, but that's hindsight's 20/20. What's that?
Does that metal detector show a size of an object?
No, mine does not tell you any type of size. It just tells you that you're getting a solid reading, and what it's reading is gold or silver or platinum. It came up platinum. Doesn't mean that that's what the object was, but the computer inside was reading platinum. No, I think what happened was, this is theory, okay? This is my opinion, so take it for what it's worth. It's not factual. I think the signal that metal detector was sending out, frequency, modulation, whatever the hell you want to call it, activated the implant. All right? Now, this is my theory, my conjecture, on almost all mutilations, including human and animal, the ear is taken. And usually it's the right ear, the animal's laying on its left side. Okay? I think that's where the last thing, when this is the scenario that I am imagining, is that when the ROV comes up to the side of the animal, the ROV takes over, because keep in mind that implant went to the base of the skull at the spine and locked the animal up. The animal's conscious, has to be if the heart's going to be pumping, not conscious, but the animal has to be alive, because whatever it is, they need the heart as a pump to get that blood out of there. I think this whole thing takes place within a minute to a minute and a half max, maybe shorter, no more than that. It's one of the reasons why they're never caught, because they're not on scene long enough for them to get caught. So I think that, to dovetail what you asked, I think that when the ROV sucks up to the animal and the process begins, that implant automatically traverses back up through the sinus cavities, back up into the ear, and the last thing it does when it leaves, cuts the ear off, and they got the implant back. That's the reason why we've never found it. That's why we didn't, I think they take that implant with them when they go, and they cut the ear, because it goes back into the sinus cavity, back into the ear. That's where it was when I first hit it. I think the signal, this is my opinion, I think that the signal from the
Metal detector.
thank you, I was having a brain fart. The metal detector activated it, whether it was the modulation frequency or whatever, or just the zone that it went through, but it started to move again. It was going to do what it did the few hours before when the RV came up. That pretty much concludes all the information that I have in terms of proof and evidence and how I see it versus academia. I know that we had this is another interesting little interesting tidbit. Motion Pictures is the one that at that time put UFO hunters out. They were the master producers of the show. And they brought in a veterinarian. I'm not sure where they got him from, but he came out to the carcass and he said unequivocally, and they didn't air this, and I don't know why, He's a veterinarian, and there was their guy, and he said, this is not predation. And I'm standing there talking to him, and I said, Doc, what is it then? He goes, I don't have a clue. But he said, I've never seen an animal mutilated like this as a result of predation. And that came from a veterinarian, which I thought was a pretty stand-up comment, and they cut it out. Don't ask me why. It wasn't my call. They didn't ask my opinion. Should have, I think. Anyway.
Are we going to Dulce now?
Oh, you want me to talk about Dulce, New Mexico? Let me tell you what happened. He gets a call. A rancher is having a confrontation with some people, he thinks, that are trying to rustle his cow. By the way, cattle rustling is big, still is. He tells the dispatcher he's getting his 30-30 and there's going to be, bring body bags because he's going to take care of the rustlers. Because he sees activity going out in his pasture, lights and stuff with his herd. He thinks it's cattle rustlers. The New Mexico police officer gets there and finds a cow that's mutilated, okay, and half the fetus of the calf is outside the cow. Now, it is on UFO Hunters, but you got to watch, when you watch the show, you got to be watching for it because they don't show it very long. Looks to me like it's half human, half cow. The animal has two forearms, not hooves or legs, looks like two forearms with hands. The head is a bulbous head. It's not a cow's head. The fetus is still in the laboratory of the medical examiner in New Mexico, and they won't release it and they won't let us have access to it. Don't ask me why. I say it looks half human. I don't know that for a fact. I asked the police officer in New Mexico what he thought it was, and he said, per my department, I'm not allowed to comment on it. I can show you the photographs, but I'm not allowed to comment on it. And he didn't. I got to respect him. I mean, he's got to look at his career. That's what it looked like. They showed it on UFO Hunters. If you watch closely on Cattle Mutes, Dulce, New Mexico, that episode, they show, you got to be watching for it because it's only about a 10-15 second of it, and then it's it. But it looked half human to me. I saw the crime scene photos. I mean, we had a chance to look at them closely. It looks like an eye, two eyes, a nose, has a head. He told us that according to the medical examiner, there was no cartilage in the skull. There was no skull. It was all soft tissue.
With all this investigating, do you ever get a little bit worried about the men in black paying you a visit?
I can tell you that I'm on my name's on a list when I fly. In fact, when I was coming here, when I got at the Tulsa airport and got my e-ticket, went through security, Mr. Storch, can you step over here for, it happens to me all the time. And they basically strip searched me. And they went through my luggage. They picked up the DVDs and looked at them, but I mean, they didn't do anything with them. But to answer, I know, I was going to tell you this. When I came out of the closet and said I believe in flying saucers and I investigate flying saucers and everything like that, I'm on the street and we're in the middle of a armed robbery at a damn grocery store, and my pager goes off and it's a 911. Well, after we handled the robbery, I called the number, and it happened to be a gentleman that was a hardcore skeptic. His father owned a part of Grease Monkey. Do you all have that here? Grease Monkeys? No? Okay, must be. I thought they were nationwide, but obviously they're not. It's a place where you can bring your car in and they'll put shocks on and oil change and stuff like that. Well, his father and family own 50% of it, their partnership. Anyway, John was a hardcore skeptic. He was at one of their shops down in Pueblo, Colorado, driving north on I-25. He sees a flying disc. He was actually calling me. He had pulled off to the side of the road. He goes, hell, there's got to be 500 cars pulled off. He said, everybody's out looking at this thing. And MUFON in Littleton started getting reports in. people were calling in saying they saw this thing. Long story short, we were able to triangulate from where John was on the highway from a number of other people. Colorado Highway 24 coming into Colorado Springs, a trucker, 18-wheeler called in and said he saw the disc lift up off the ground. So Bob and I, we triangulated and we figured we had it down to about 10 square miles of where the sighting took place, where the actual thing took place. And so we get in my truck, that Jimmy, and drive 22 miles east of Colorado Springs, about 14 miles east of Peterson Air Force Base. If you know where you can Google this stuff and you can bring it up. We come across a military base out in the middle of nowhere. I came up over this little hill, and here is a military base, and it's not a very large base. I would say we drove all the way around it, probably half a mile wide and a mile long. It wasn't that big of a base. Took some pictures and left. There was nobody. We saw no vehicles, no indication anybody was around, but it said U.S. Air Force Base, private, keep out, all others will be shot type of stuff. I go to work the next day. I'm in the briefing, the watch commander comes in, he says, Officer Storch, he says, I need to see you in my office after briefing. And so I'm walking to his office after briefing, I'm thinking, there's no way in hell they could know about it, because I'm the only one that was there. I'm not talking, no, they couldn't know about that. What the hell did I do to get, I walk in, there's 2 FBI agents in his office. And they closed the door, and the one FBI agent looks at me and he goes, Officer, he said, what were you doing at Scribner Air Force Base? I go, what? He goes, I said, I wasn't at Scribner. He goes, oh yeah? He says, is this your truck? Yeah. I said, that's me driving. He says, well, you were at Scribner Air Force Base. I said, hey, I had no idea. I didn't know. It didn't have a name. It didn't say Scribner Air Force Base. It just said U.S. Air Force installation, blah, blah, blah. He said, what were you doing down there? And I go, checking out a flying saucer report. He never cracked a smile. Never laughed, never said, oh man, you're one of those. Never said anything. He said, in the future, he said, I would stay away from there. That's exactly what he said. And that was the end of it. I never heard any more. John Schuessler, who was the international director before James Carrion took over. John and I are really good friends. I've learned a lot from him. Are you familiar with the Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum case in Texas that he did? We did a show on that. I had the opportunity to reinvestigate that case. And I got so pissed at UFO hunters because they went, excuse me, they said this is the spot, and they drilled a core sample out of the road bed. I don't know if you all saw that or not, and had it analyzed, and I was livid. I hadn't been involved with them at all, but I sent them all kinds of emails. I called Kevin, who was the producer. I go, you guys are not even close. And they weren't. They weren't at the right spot. I knew they weren't at the right spot. And I had a chance to reinvestigate the case, the Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum case, with John Schuessler. And we went to the exact site. And I mean to tell you, you're walking down a blacktop road that's no wider than probably one vehicle can get by. And for 100 yards, the blacktop stops and is replaced with concrete. And it goes for 100 yards, and then the blacktop picks up again. All the trees and shrubbery on both sides of the road had been removed. And we talked to at least 4 people that had lived in the area all their lives, and when that incident took place, I think it was 1982, 84, somewhere in there. What was it? Yeah, 1980. They said that within 2 weeks, yellow trucks, they were painted yellow, showed up and stripped all the asphalt and took all the dirt and everything on both sides of the road. And we were never able to find any records anywhere in the county or the state of Texas where they used yellow trucks. The only ones that used yellow trucks was the United States Army.
What about hazmat?
Well, hazmat didn't exist then.
Form?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they had. Yeah, I mean they had. Yeah. I think that's what it was. I think the Army
But the tools.
contracted
the
with.
tools would have been the same.
Yeah, I think the Army contracted with a private firm to come in and remove it, and they probably didn't even know what they were doing in terms.
They scraped the whole patch out.
Yeah, and so on that show, I knew instantly that they weren't at the right spot because it's so obvious. I've got pictures of it. I took probably 100 pictures. You can see the delineation between the blacktop and the concrete. It's so obvious. And I'm watching you. I said, well, that's not it. That's not even close. And in fact, John and I were on the phone with each other, and he goes, I know. He said, they're in the wrong place. But they drilled core samples out of there and sent them off and had them analyzed, and, you know.
How'd they come back?
Inconclusive. Okay. And I was, yeah. And see, once again, I know that it makes for good TV, but I'm one of these people, I think truth is stranger than fiction anytime. You don't have to make anything up, man. What's going on is the real deal. That's what you report on, that's what you show, and I think that's good TV, but that's my opinion. I guess that's why I'm a cop and they were producers. I don't know. It just seems logical to me, but anyway. Yeah, that's an interesting case, Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum. I had a chance, both of them are deceased now. I don't know if you all know that or not, but they. Yeah, Betty Cash, when I interviewed her, I spent an entire day with that woman. And I found her to be down to earth, credible, and she grabbed my arm and she said, do me a favor. And I said, what's that? She goes, I don't think, this was maybe 3 years before she passed away. She said, if you find out what really happened to me, she said, would you make it known to my daughter? I said, absolutely. I said, I'll make it known to the entire world if I can pin it on somebody or someone. But she was wanting to find out truly what happened to her and Betty Cash out in the middle of Texas that night. That's an awesome case. And John Schuessler did a hell of a job investigating. He crossed his T's and dotted his I's. He's a good investigator.
Wasn't that an experimental military craft?
That's what a lot of people think. I don't know. I think that whatever, I didn't know this until about 2 years ago. There was a rat, once again, here you have an IFO. Betty Cash was very, very descriptive in her, what she saw. So was Betty Cash. They saw a metallic object. They saw structured craft. But about 2 weeks prior to them having that incident, there were all kinds of UFO reports up and down that whole area, down around Midland, Texas, and the Gulf, and it's all, I think, associated with what occurred with them. To answer your question, I don't know. I know there's a lot of speculation that it might have been a secret military craft of some sort, atomic powered, is what they were saying. I don't know.
Well, it emitted a lot of radiation, and also it was escorted by a bunch of black helicopters.
I talked to Dr. McKellen. I don't know if you know who he is. Well, I'll tell you how important it is to radiation therapy. They sent him over to Chernobyl when the Russians had their nuclear disaster over there in Chernobyl. He's also the one that happened to be at Houston Memorial Hospital when Betty Cash came in. He was not her attending physician, but they brought her in the emergency room, and she was throwing up, and she had blisters on her face and her hands, and her hair starting to fall out. And the emergency room doctors were not sure what was going on. Dr. McKellen happened to be there. It was just purely accidental, and recognized it right away as radiation poisoning. I sat in that man's office for about 2 hours talking to him, and I asked him how potent of a dose did Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum get. He said, Betty Cash got out of the car, okay, so she got blasted full load. Colby, the grandson, and Vicki Landrum stayed in the car, and they didn't get it as bad. They got it, but not as bad. But he said, to answer your question, it was equivalent for her being within a half a mile of ground zero at Hiroshima. That's a pretty potent dose of radiation. He said, all the classic symptoms, right to the point where he said, the moment you're exposed to the moment you start having blisters and hair and getting sick to your stomach, he said the time frame fit perfect. Within 72 hours, she was throwing up. that night, when they got home, she didn't feel good, and she went to bed and she started throwing up. And Dr. McCullen said that is classic radiation symptoms. He said, I don't know what happened out there on the road, but he looked into the camera because we were filming him. Once again, they cut that out, figures. And he said, you have to ask yourself something. Where does 2 ladies and a young child get irradiated in the middle of Texas in the middle of the night? How does that happen? And of course, what's his name? Phil Klass. You know who he was? He's passed away too. Yeah. We were talking about that particular case because he came up to a symposium in Denver in the early 90s, and he had all these buttons on. I'm a victim of Betty Cash. I've been abducted. He was making a mockery of, and him and I were having a discussion about the Betty Cash and Vicki Landrum incident. And his contention was they did it for publicity because she was a restaurant owner. That's what he told me. And I looked at Mr. Klaas and I said, okay. I said, where did she get the radiation? And he just stared at me. He never, ever answered that question. And see, that's what pisses me off, pardon my French, about skeptics, is that when, okay, let's play along, and I go with your argument up to a point, then you tell me that when a radar operator from a military base is telling a military pilot that's intercepting, they're vectoring him in to intercept an unknown, and his onboard radar confirms, plus you have a visual sighting exactly where the ground tracking station tells him to look where they're vectoring the plane in, and the pilot tells you he sees a dish-shaped object takes off at a high rate of speed. How do you explain that?
It's just an anecdote.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the position that they take. I mean, hey, you can be a weather balloon, it can be a meteor, it can be swamp gas, it can be everything up until that point, because it doesn't fit in the box. It's outside what they're trying to explain. And that's what gets me irritated with the academia, is that, okay, then explain that to me, because that's a pretty important piece of evidence. And you say there's no scientific evidence, and yet we have a scientific instrument that is measuring it, and we have visual confirmation from a trained pilot. Explain that. By the way, I'll finish up here real quick. I think, this is my opinion, take it for what it's worth, but be on your toes, because I think we're going to have another Roswell. I think it's coming. Roswell?
What do you mean?
Oh, we're going to have another major incident where we're going to have an object crash.
When do you think that's going to happen?
I think it's going to happen real soon, and I don't have any specific information to that, but we're long overdue for. And I love this one. I had the two astrophysicists said, "Ken, now they have the technology to fly hundreds and millions of miles, and they get here to this planet, and their equipment fails and they crash." And I said, well, Doc, let's take a look at that. We have the capability of building airplanes for over 100 years. I think we got the art of flying. Better yet, we've been building cars for over 100 years. And I think we've got the technology down on how to build cars. I said, they still crash. He goes, well, yeah, but that's human error. And I go, it doesn't make any difference. The fact is, they still crash. We've been making ships for over 1,000 years, and the bastards still sink. Okay? Because you cannot, I don't care what anybody says, you cannot factor in all the variables. Now I'm going to tell you something about Roswell that I'm currently researching. Most people don't realize this. This comes from a retired nuclear submarine commander. He's still alive. And I can't get him. I asked him one time, I said, George, did you ever track unidentified objects under the ocean when you were a nuclear submarine commander? And he said, all the time. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But every once in a while, he'll send me something. This last little tidbit that he gave me, he sends me an article with a note attached to it, and he says, hey, he says, you're into that Roswell. That's how he put it. He says, check this out. The United States Navy was at Roswell in 1947 doing some heavy-duty experiments. Do you know what they were doing? You might recognize this. You ever hear the term Doppler radar? Well, the United States Navy, because of the kamikaze attacks on Okinawa in World War II, realized that the fleet, you had your aircraft carrier, which was the heart and soul, I think it still is, of the fleet. In World War II around Okinawa, they had to put out these smaller picket ships, like 60 miles out, so they could pick up incoming kamikaze attacks and that they could vector the fighters from the carrier to intercept the kamikazes. Well, when we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, the United States Navy realized that it's only going to be a matter of time before our enemies are going to have atomic bombs, and if they were able to put one on a kamikaze and fly it, they could take out the entire fleet. So they needed to have over-the-horizon radar, Doppler radar, looking down over the curvature of the Earth. Dr. Doppler started working on it, and that's how we came up on Doppler, or over-the-horizon radar. What's interesting is, I drove out to Roswell, and the radar stanchions are still out there. They still have a sign. I got photographs. It says Department of the United States Navy. They're wooden structures where they had their radar towers. They're spaced every 26 miles apart. And what they were doing at the time was experimenting with over-the-horizon radar. I talked to a retired lieutenant commander that was in research and development in the Navy, and he confirmed what this retired nuclear submarine commander told me about the Navy being out at Roswell doing, actually it was White Sands, but it's all down in that same area. He told me something further. He said, well, just so you know, Ken, he said the radar was so powerful and they were boosting the signal, he said that we wanted to see inside of a thunderstorm. And I said, why? He said, well, because in World War II, he said the damn Japanese would hide their fleet and planes behind a rain squall, and he said they would pop out at the last minute, and he said they'd only be 25, 30 miles away. He said if we could penetrate that rain squall and the thunderstorm and see what was on the other side of it, he said we would know that. So we were experimenting with penetrating, and he said, I don't know if it has anything to do with anything, but he said, wasn't there a violent electrical storm going on at the time of the Roswell crash? And I said, well, I think so. He said, I wouldn't be surprised if the Navy didn't crank up their radar. Here's what I think happened. I think they did, not knowing that there were two flying discs up there in the clouds, and when they did, and when that radar beam came around, it fried their navigation. They weren't shielded against it, and they crashed into one another, and that's when you had two saucers come down. Okay, I'm done. Thanks for having me.
Again, thank you all. We have meetings here second Saturday of every month.
Right arm.
Right now.